I do think that it's fine to be proud of your work. I think it's part of the process.
I'm very, very grateful for every single one of you just supporting the show, and it's been awesome. We're only like 8 months into it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things digital art and Procreate, because we're both Procreate shooters here on YouTube. My name is Joel, otherwise known as JoelCreate, and my co-host, as always, is the one and only James Julier. James, before we get started, I just want to apologise. My voice is very, very tired. I have not been very well in the last week, so you'll have to put up with me coughing probably relentlessly, but muted in the background. How has your week been, mate, since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been better than yours by the sound of it. It's been fine. It's not majorly eventful, just the run up to Christmas, buying presents, catching up with people in that kind of mad panic before it all starts, you know. Have you had apart from being ill, have you been up to much else? Or
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
just absolutely written me off this week. And then on the Friday, I tried to record a tutorial and I just happened to go on for ages. It was like a 2.5 hour recording, and I had to do it in like 45-minute segments because it was like just spluttering and coughing and all sorts. So for anyone who watches that video that is out by the time you're watching this, well out, it's a North Pole adventure map. If you've watched it and you've sat through 2 hours and 10 minutes worth of me really croaky, really tired, and just absolutely like just ill as anything, I commend you, and I'm very grateful for you sitting through it and sitting through that experience. So what we're going to do today, this is actually going out obviously on New Year's Eve, so this is the perfect time for us to take a look back at our tutorials this year. But we're not just going to take a look back this year. We're going to crown our number one tutorial that we released in 2024. We've got our top 3 each, and we're going to go through each of them and let you know where they are. So as always, if you like any of these tutorials and you haven't seen them yet, you can go back, look in the description down below, and you'll find links to every single one of the tutorials that will feature in here. James, you're up first. What is your third place for 2024?
Now, it's been a difficult thing of sort of text backwards and forwards a little bit. I kind of, in my head, jumbled them around a little bit. But the third place is there's like a sunny arch. So we have like an archway that's kind of evolved out of trees and stones and organic matter. With then sunlight kind of pouring through that and just catching some of the vegetation. And then in the distance, through the kind of hazy glow, you can make out some distant kind of steps and stuff like that. It was one that I really enjoyed concentrating on. That just is primarily about lighting. I mean, it's about texture and color and other things too. But for me, the thing that really I enjoyed about it was the effect of the lighting. I think the lighting was what made it for me, really, what I really enjoyed about doing that one. And I've seen loads of versions of it too, which has been really satisfying. It's amazing how much variation you can see within, one of your tutorials. I've seen loads of sort of subtle variations, people that have added things to it, and they all look subtly different. But I think just the strong lighting coming through and just catching the edge and the rocks of the tree roots and the tree trunk, I think it just worked in a way that it was really satisfying to see other people's versions of that. I mean,
I love this one. This one was everywhere.
It was quite a popular one by a lot of people following it. And it's hard to pin down. I mean, I couldn't tell you whether it was one of my best in terms of following it. I mean, I can only judge by the numbers a little bit, and certainly it seemed to be responded. I got a good response from it. Is it the easiest one? I don't know if it's the easiest one to follow. It's the best one to follow. Whether the production level or the best, it's more a case of I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the outcome of it, and I've enjoyed seeing other people's versions of it too. I think I can only really. I don't know about you, but I forget the process almost completely. Once I've done a couple of tutorials beyond that, I can't remember. I'd have to go back and watch it to even remember how I did it. People ask me, can you name a good starter tutorial or an easy one? And all I can tend to think of is, is it a complex looking image kind of, or is it something that is a long tutorial? I think this is probably an intermediate level. I don't think it's necessarily the most difficult one because I've seen people be able to successfully follow it at a varying sort of degree of skill levels. So it was quite a fun one to do. It was.
I just think if I didn't put them in playlists and like straight away at the time of publishing, I would.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same. I'd totally forget. They'd just be all over the place, and I'd forget what I've done. I'm
Yeah.
glad that there's a little bit of organization, but this
Yeah.
one, this is awesome because there's such a stark contrast as well between that. Well, I'd say mid ground, I guess, like with the actual arch itself. The background is its whole other sort of world to consider. The lighting, how does the distance as well make a difference to the lighting, and how the colors fade off and get more blue and into the sky and so on. But also, you also you've segregated there like the foreground heavily as well, to the point where there's a certain level of require, isn't there, in foreground to make it look very sharp and appealing to look at. And so there's so much there to tackle. And then you've got the mid ground itself with the tree as well. Awesome tutorial. And I think what's really nice to see about this one, and the fact I've seen so many of them, is that people can tackle it, because that, I think this is your intro anyway, about being able to, make something that you didn't think you could draw and making it a reality. And this is just one of those ones where potentially you look at it and go, there's a lot going on here. I don't know how to draw. And obviously that's why the tutorial's there. But when you see so many people producing it, I think it's awesome to see. It's just like, it was one of those moments in the year where you look at it and you realize you kind of nailed that for whatever reason, like whatever factors it was.
It's reaffirming, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know sometimes. Nice. You think you can push it too far and you think, oh, I've gone too much detail, too realistic. Oh, I don't think it's necessarily that real. I think the lighting is kind of realistic, but the textures themselves rely upon a couple of brushes, and the brushes do a lot of the work. I mean, it's probably the rainforest brushes for look at it, zoom in on it. It's more than likely. But the brushes do a lot of the work, and then it's just about getting the right colours in the right place. I mean, it seems kind of, overly simplistic to say that, but it kind of is. Once you understand where to put the colours, I think things fall together a little bit sometimes, don't they? And the foreground detail is largely in the shadows, so the really close-up stuff isn't as detailed as all that, because it's darker, and I think your eye's distracted to the middle distance where the really strong sort of stones and roots are highlighted. So the stuff that's really foreground is kind of muted and kind of out of focus. It's not. I don't think I even use much depth of field on that one. Maybe I did, but a little bit. But it's kind of in the shadows anyway, so it's less important if it's super crisp in those areas anyway.
But this is part of that kind of phase that I think you went through this year of quite fantasy themed landscapes. Because if I looked at this, I could easily see Frodo walking through here, or some some sort of fantasy landscape scene. And I'm looking at this and going, I wonder if you could lean even further into it, like in the future, like with adding in, like I can see in the top right, there's like leaves and greenery in the top right, but for some reason it made me think of like glowing kind of like glowworms in the air, or little bits of
fireflies.
Magic and stuff. And I could imagine fireflies, like a little bit of, like I always refer to it as magic. I could see like an extra addition to this of some magic kind of element to it, and really heavily lean into that kind of fantasy world. But again, this is what I was saying, sorry, is that like it's cool because this reflects that fantasy sort of period of tutorials I think you went through. I can think of the stone bridge as well that you did, the heavily green one, but lots of fantasy ones before then, sort of leaning closer towards the subject matter of like buildings being in there as well. So it's nice to see one of the fantasy ones pop up.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go with, in my third place, I've got a painting tutorial that I released on Patreon, where this one, it's not maybe the most detailed work in the world. It's not necessarily the most, technically difficult, but I think that's why I enjoyed it so much. Yeah. It was a real kind of loose painting style, keeping it very simple, letting the brush and the application of the brush do every single bit of the work. The grooves on the mountain, the trees, it's just, you can see on the left-hand side tree, just pointing the paintbrush outwards from that center point, and then just layering on the color, very big and blocky. And I think I try to do quite a lot of variety, I would say, in terms of like, if I could, I would probably lean towards this quite a lot and try to really
Mm,
nail this. And also, this is one of the pieces that makes me really realize that I need to start leaning towards putting subjects
sure.
into the frame somewhere. But I like this one because I don't want to draw faces. We've spoke about this in a previous episode. If no one's seen that yet, we previously went through all the things we don't like to draw and things we don't include in our tutorials and why. So it's worth taking a look at that episode. I'll
Yeah,
leave it linked at the end of this one. But this one I managed to get a fisherman in there and not have to worry too much about him and drawing people as such, because the scale of him is nice and small. He's facing away from scene. I also
sure.
made sure to give him a big curly beard as well, so that really wraps around. So essentially, all you see from a face and kind of detail of a head is just an ear, and then just the slight bit of eyes. But because again, the scale of it, you don't, and it's the only thing that's necessarily crisp and detailed in there, like the fishing rod as well. But I really enjoyed it, the symmetry of it as well, the application of the colors, little things like on the left hand side as well, and the bottom of the design of just the rocks and letting letting. It's hard to. I find this a bit difficult to explain, but not sort of bringing the whole design to the edge of canvas. Letting like a rock be there and that's it. It's just a little something, and then it just fades out quite quickly. You don't have to like finish off the whole rock, if that makes sense. It's just like a
Sure.
little snippet of it, a few paint strokes, and that's it. And I could, for some reason, I don't know why. Maybe this gives me sort of vibes of like some of the pieces my granddad would paint, and so I think maybe there's a little bit of something there, a little bit of bias
Yeah.
in there from that kind of thing. But
I
yeah,
really like
this
the
is a
painterly look to it. I think I like the fact that it isn't necessarily bound to the square or the rectangle either. It kind of softens and evolves out. It's got this kind of painterly, almost kind of like a watercolor edge to it, where it
mm,
just naturally fades away as well. Although it doesn't fade away. You've done a series of like watercolor ones that do more obviously kind of just fade, whereas this is more like the appearance of like an oil paint, I think, or acrylic paint.
yes,
It's got a
yeah.
stronger, more bold look, isn't it? But I quite like the textural way that and the way it suddenly ends at the edges there is really quite pleasant. I like that.
There's certain things to with that as well that like it bizarrely it kind of does have to look a certain way. Like that water does need to kind of thin to a degree as it kind of
Mm,
gets close to the edge, or like you kind of drag it out a little bit and then just hope that like the final few scrapes that you put in there just allow the like it to look as if it does fade away off to the edge of the scene. Like it can be quite easy to put like a bit of a solid line there. I tried to do it with the bush on the right hand side below the tree. There is a straight edge there to a degree, and then there's just a little bit of extra paint above it to hopefully break down that kind of solid line, which I really
yeah,
really wanted to avoid. But this is just that style this year that I used quite a bit. I did an apple painting. I did this one. I drew a number of designs in that kind of bold, blocky painting style,
yeah,
and just really, really enjoyed it. It's one of those kind of tests that we can be, for example, with your piece prior that we just looked at. Very detailed, lots of like detail in lots of elements and greenery, and sometimes to bring yourself backwards and really, really simplify is
yeah,
quite tricky, but also a good test to bring it back a little bit and just try to summarize whatever it is in just a few paint strokes and keep it very, very simple. And it
yeah,
was even down to like the application of the colors in the stones. There's like 5 or 6 colors in those stones, and the color, like being so free just to literally just splash the color on and not think about it too much. A general consensus for the lighting maybe being on one side, essentially where the fisherman's facing, but that's it really. And
yeah.
just yeah, I had a great amount of fun with this style this year. I'd like to revisit it next year as well, and
Cool.
revisit the paintbrush as well, and see if maybe instead of a kind of sharp taper on one end, maybe it's a little bit blockier and quite go for that kind of very blocky nature to it. What are you crowning then as second place for your 2024 top awards?
Yeah, I mean, I was in two minds with this one. I kind of liked this second place and the top spot. It was a very close thing between them. My kind of taste is towards quite dark subject matter. in terms of like, I really love horror movies, and my music tastes
Yeah.
tend to be a little bit kind of angry and dark kind of musically. So the haunted house, if you like, or the Halloween house, or the however you want to look at it, is my number two. I just really love the theme. I really love the mood of it. I love the textures on the house. Got this kind of really grimy, old, kind of ramshackled look. This is the extended version, actually. So this version has the addition of a boat that's sort of submerged, and then like moorings off to the side, and a little bit of kind of land off. That's just frames it a little bit at that bottom right area. I think that was the only additions, and I think I added the reflection of the chimney in that one as well, which I forgot to in the main tutorial. But there you go. Yeah, it was only a subtle addition because it kind of distorts, but somebody did point out that I'd forgotten to do the reflection of the chimney, so I added that. I didn't doing that. I then looked back at it and realised I hadn't reflected the trees on the left either. So it's a constant nightmare of noticing little mistakes and errors. But yeah, there's prominent trees on the left that also don't have a reflection, even in the extended one. So. But arguably, they would be quite thinned out and less noticeable there. Just a couple of tiny marks would have fixed that. But I think because it didn't look too jarring, and it's not too far away from what it probably would be, it kind of slipped my mind to even bother doing them. So, but yeah, I really love doing it. Really, into my kind of subject area. I don't do typically kind of creepy looking things, and my number one is kind of the opposite of that, really. But it does take me back to my kind of youth where I was so heavily into horror and that kind of thing. One of my favorite, it's kind of bonkers now, but when I was sort of like 10, 11, I was into horror movies that were well beyond the age that I should have been watching them. And they formed quite an important part of my psyche. In my personal work, my kind of surreal style, there's a certain creepiness and weirdness about it that, I think maybe that's the reason I don't sell my personal work too much, is that it's a little bit odd for people. It's just a little bit darker, more spiky, more strange than people want to stick on their wall. So this was a nice one. It was a good opportunity just to delve into that darkness a little bit, and so I really enjoyed it.
I think, again, we said this about a previous tutorial that you did, and it was the snowy cabin one. This one you could draw at any time of year. I think even though you planned it for Halloween,
Yeah.
I still think you've done a good job of like keeping it open to the point where it's not too heavy. Like if you'd have scattered pumpkins in there and everything like that, it's too tightly related. Yes. Whereas I think someone, with a similar interest or even just like loves that kind of vibe will see this in any month and be like, yes, that's the one I want to draw. Do you think you draw more like, let's say, just refer to it as like a dark kind of themed aesthetics, like in 2025?
Possibly so. I mean, it's difficult not to be steered by the success of things, isn't it? A little bit,
Yeah.
You do fall victim of the algorithm. It kind of dictates to you a little bit, and it was one I enjoyed, and it's one that people seem to respond to. And like you say, it hasn't. A lot of the ones we've done at Halloween have just fizzled, and nobody watches them much really. And you get kind of a few views per day, but this one is relatively strong still, because I guess it does have that universal all year round appeal for anyone who's into horror and that kind of creepy house. So yeah, it's certainly something I'd look into. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to kind of put people off, because for every tutorial you'll do where there's people that like it, there's a good percentage of people that it will put off. So I try to ring fence it a little bit to the kind of period that it belongs, and people will go, oh yeah, that's fine. But if I start wheeling out, dark tutorial after dark tutorial after dark tutorial, I've suddenly become the horror tutor. So,
but nobody does that. Nobody does it on YouTube.
True, so maybe that's a new niche, isn't it?
It'd be a whole new avenue to go down and go really dark next year.
Yeah, well, who knows? Watch this space. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
But this was another example. Sorry, before we move on, this, just in terms of the visual technique of it, this was another example where you could hide a lot of stuff within the mist. We've talked about this quite a few times, haven't we? About how
Yeah.
when you have low lying mist and that softness, it kind of is a bit of a get out. And I know now from doing the Christmas ones where you've got all the pine trees with loads of snow and every branch is in detail. It was quite nice to do a silhouette where even the bottom of the tree is just faded out with fog and smoke. And
Yeah.
so I think that was one aspect that I really enjoyed about it. Sorry, yeah, go on.
I think that, no, I was going to say, that's also like one of the things that I've really picked up this year is like the certain, how can I put this? There's certain curtains you can put up, I think, in your work, and
Yeah,
like anyone can in their work, to avoid drawing certain things, or you know, thinking a little bit longer about where can I apply that. For example, you could have put the shoreline there in the bottom right corner much higher, and
yeah,
then you've got to fill blank space at the front. So then
true.
you got to consider that. But by bringing it a little bit closer towards you, you're just reflecting the content above and not having to fill out that. And to a degree, I mean, we are right in saying that you don't have to fill out every single corner of your canvas. Absolutely not.
Yeah,
But I think when you do a missed one, your brain just fully accepts that there's nothing in that left-hand side past those trees because it's misty. We wouldn't, even if there is
exactly.
anything, I wouldn't be able to see it anyway. So like all of these kind of blankets that we can use to try and it's not a matter of avoiding it, is it? It's just like what can simplify the process, especially with mine and yourself. Our content is like, there's a certain time frame, but for some people, I think if you've got the time, you can fill it in. But for
Yeah,
us, I think it's this really nice time saver, but also the vibe of it is just cool, isn't it? As well, like
I
the
just
misty
love the
ones, whether it's
atmosphere.
just
Yeah,
bad weather, yeah,
exactly.
bad weather, the color of the moon in the background is awesome. Really cool tutorial. And
Thank you.
like I said, like I said earlier, I think this will be awesome for anyone to pick up at any time throughout the year. My second place is my floral cottage tutorial that I released on YouTube. I remember texting you about this and saying,
Yes.
I don't know where to put this, like YouTube or Patreon and so on, because
Yeah.
it's a slightly longer tutorial. I think it was 2 to 3, somewhere in that range,
Mm.
because we just heavily filled out so much. But there's blankets in there as well. For example, like the pink bush and the green bush on the right hand side to avoid sort of having to color necessarily in the right hand side of
Sure.
the building. There's certain blankets in there, but actually referring to the design, there's so many things in here. I just had so much fun with the
Yeah.
just relentless application of the Aurora brush to create all the flowers. But then a little technique that I've not done before, I think this one, but like layering in the Aurora with one color and then having a brighter accent color to then alpha lock the layer and scatter that color in the same area. So
Yes.
the reds in the bottom left, for example, it's a dark red to start with, and then we scatter in
Yeah.
a much more saturated version of it in those areas. It was just really fun just to have like, here's the kind of base tone, here's the brighter tone, scatter the
Yeah.
base tone, and then highlight it through and just create all the variation in all of the
It
flower
works
beds
for
in there.
dappled light, doesn't it? So you don't necessarily want to have a whole flower that's lighter. You want to
Yeah.
add a couple of the petals on one flower that are hit by light, but then the other half of the flower is more in shadow, isn't it? And that's perfect with the
Yeah.
alpha lock. Yeah.
And that's the thing we can easily do by accident, I think, is just scatter in like the Aurora brush at full opacity and everything looks exactly the same. But then there's, like you say, there's things in the way. It could be the tree on the left. It could be
Yeah.
a flower just above a flower, and you've got that staggering. So, and just to embed things a little bit further back in the design, like closer to the ground by making them a little bit darker, it just gives you so much
Yeah.
more depth. Messed around with different techniques in this one for the cobbled path, and then also kind of rolling down that kind of idea of, okay, well, it's very close to us. We'll identify each one of the little bricks in the road there or in the path, but then just saying, fine, once it gets further back, it's all getting compressed, and we'll just leave it and let it run out all the way up the past the cottage itself. Just so much fun in this one, and the fact it was, again, I think maybe I wonder whether how it's received on like whatever platform it is changes our opinion on it, like whether or not we
I
are
think it
leaning
can.
based on reaction and just like an overall feeling, or is it
Yeah.
genuinely a piece that we really loved drawing? Because I enjoyed all the techniques in this, but I think the fact it was also so well like
Yeah.
received on
Received,
YouTube
yeah.
probably also
Of
heavily
course.
gets involved there. What do you think about that?
I think it's heavily tied, but then I think there's a reason why people gravitate towards something. They don't gravitate towards the weakest of our tutorials, do they?
Mm,
Typically, there has to be some strength there for them for it to be popular. It's rare. It's rare that ones that I don't rate in any sense have done well. There's one or two that are from years ago that I think I don't know why that did so well, and other ones haven't. But these days, that seems to have balanced out a lot more. And when you showed me this one, you were considering putting it on Patreon, and there's nothing wrong with having really good content reserved for Patreon. But I think maybe it's just the duration, like you say. It was because it was a longer tutorial, and you weren't sure how that would work with the
mm,
algorithm. But it seemed to me such a crying shame to hide that image. It's such a beautiful image to hide it. Well, not hide it, because you obviously got a decent following on Patreon. It's there'd be a good chunk of people that would see it, but at the same time, there's thousands and thousands of people that would benefit from
yeah,
seeing it on YouTube. And it would obviously, we have to think about the health of our channels and all these, and growing on YouTube and building an audience as much as possible. And it seemed like an obvious um, image. I mean, it's easy to say from the outside sometimes, isn't it? And to look at what somebody's doing, and go, yeah, you really need to do that. And this was such a lovely, and again, I think this has it's not just something you could do in the summer. You could look at an image like this, and it has universal all year round appeal too. I think
yeah,
people in the winter want to escape the snow and the cold, and might just sort of indulge in a fantasy piece, because this kind of borders on that. I know it's mainly realistic, but it has almost like a fairy tale, like gingerbread house. Almost, it's not,
yeah,
but it's so kind of cottagey, isn't it? Kind of oldie worldy, that it almost has that kind of fairy tale quality to it, and the dappled
yeah.
light on the path, and just the general atmosphere, I think is really nice. And it did do well for you, didn't
It
it,
did
as a
do
video?
well.
So yeah,
It's a constant debate. I mean, a bit of BTS really. I've texted you as well about another design that's also equally about 2 to 3 hours long, and I'm like, I just still don't know where to put this. But I do now. But at the
yeah,
time, I'm like, what do you think? And it's just so interesting to get another insight on it. But it's the differences in our models of our,
mm,
I guess, businesses or channels, whatever you want to refer to them
yeah,
as, that makes such a difference. But anyway, we were sidetracking onto kind of the business side of it. But again, just a design I really enjoyed, and the colors, especially in the trees and bushes behind the cottage,
yeah.
equally enjoyed. There's like light greens
Blue
into then
greens,
some
yeah,
really nice, yeah, bluey greens into those nice
yeah.
yellowy greens towards the top. Just really, all in all, just had so much fun and just enjoyed it. And yeah, definitely, it's right up there. I mean, I guess if we think about it, this is actually probably my number one. Well, this is my number one YouTube tutorial
Right,
of 2024, because
yeah,
my number one is on Patreon. So yeah, this would take the crown on YouTube this year. I
yeah.
typically do a post on my Instagram, but it usually goes back through the top 10. So this will be number one. So people watching this will already know to a degree.
Superb.
Let's get the drum roll out, because I want to know what you've got for number one this year. What's going to take your number one tutorial of 2024?
Sure. It's a kind of quite stylized, almost kind of anime look mountain landscape. And I guess it's more in the kind of Studio Ghibli kind of anime vibe, in terms of the exaggerated blue sky, and some of the colors that are a little bit ramped up there. But it was one of the ones that opened the doorway for me a little bit to really push the colors a bit further, I think.
Mm,
Um, and I found a couple of images, and I thought, yeah, I love those colors. And so, I think this is the extended one, as I remembered. So I think I added the river, a few flowers in the bottom right, and a few more stones. The stones I struggled with, we had this discussion, didn't we, about what we tend to avoid or what we struggle with, and stones is always one of those. They get away with them a little bit here because they're kind of subtle in that foreground area. They're not a massive feature. It's more about the sky and the clouds and the mountain, and then the kind of gradient from the blue purple of the kind of mountain. It's almost got a purple vibe, down to kind of greens and yellows, and then warmer colours as it gets closer and closer to us. I just love the colours, I think, is the main thing for this one. It really did. switched me on a little bit. I think, I've always enjoyed exploring colours, but this was so saturated and so full on in terms of the blue of the sky and other things, and it really just did open doorways to me thinking more along those lines. I think there was a good few after that where the sky was as exaggerated as that as well. I think this is probably the one that was most successful in terms of that. And I think it primarily comes down to the gradient from the blue, the way it blends into kind of blue greens and yellows. And I think if you were to blur that completely, use the Gaussian blur on it and just look at it from the perspective of the color kind of transitions, I think that's why I enjoy it really is the blocks, almost like the bands of color that cut across it that are really quite saturated and quite bold. And it did well. And, it's one of those again, isn't it? I've not put up an image here that didn't do well. That sometimes does happen. I'll hold on to something that hasn't done as well. And because I rate it, I'll kind of, I'll do a bit of a George Lucas on it, where he still holds on to his, Jar Jar Binks character and says it's the best character he ever created. You're probably not a Star Wars fan, are you, Joel? I don't know. But
I've not watched it, but I don't want everybody to come after me in the comments. I want to, but I've just never got around to do it. We'll carry on from there.
but the point is that, when asked about his favourite Star Wars character, he clung on to Jar Jar Binks, even though the fans, for the most part, turned against Jar Jar Binks. And most fans would say Jar Jar Binks is the kind of worst Star Wars character, but he still hung on to it somehow, and sometimes that happens. And there's one or two of my tutorials I think, that should have done better. I mean, you're probably spoken about this, the post box in the snow is spoken recently as one that you really enjoyed doing, you're really proud of, and it didn't necessarily take off in the way that you felt it kind of deserved to in comparison to some others. But this one's done well. I don't know whether I've not checked the analytics on it, the numbers on it recently. I don't know whether it's still bobbing along at the same pace, but after a certain number, I'm fine. I'll write it off as a success overall, and it has done well.
That's awesome. So I think the technical bit of, like you were saying, the gradient change between the mountain into the landscape, it's quite a technical thing to try and really pull off in a very narrow band of like that transition. Was that a bit of a tricky thing to do? Is it the grasses then just layered on top of the mountain kind of break that little band down for me a little bit?
No, I'm not sure. I will have done the mountain. It would have been the mountain to the general gradient, and then it would have been a subtly different color just going over the top. I can't remember without going over the tutorial exactly.
Right.
I don't think there's been a lot of Gaussian blur and those kind of things. I think it was just having the right color for the right spot.
Nice.
And I think just colors were subtly different, and then placed in the right bit, and then just especially if you use something like the soft brush with an airbrushing, at a lower opacity, you can just do bands of it and go over it and over it, and it just builds up that way. Really, I think that's the way I approached it.
This has got so much content to it as well. Like it's like as if you could cut it in half and put a sky behind the land here, the green land, and just have sky and just say this is the plane of land, or the opposite and maybe reflect the mountain. But it's almost like there's so much content all the way through, like the foreground of the flowers and the rocks. The river on its own is beautiful the way it runs through there.
This was the extended one, so I think the main YouTube one didn't have the river, and so it was a little simpler on the YouTube version.
So for context, anyone watching, James typically releases a tutorial on YouTube, and then that's up to a certain point. Well, it's finished, and then we'll further extend it over on Patreon. So if you want to get the Patreon extended version, it will be available over there. You'll just need to complete the YouTube version first. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the river, the foreground on its own, it's just beautiful. And then just rolling into the background as well. The mountain is super detailed. Sometimes you can put like a focal kind of blur on it, can't you? And like focus the attention on just a single element to this. This is just all like to a degree in focus. It's really awesome. There's so much going on in it, and I'm not surprised it did well as well, because I think traditionally you've seen a few mountain pieces, right, that have done quite well on the channel in the past throughout the years.
I have. I think this was way more colourful a version of it,
Yes,
of that theme
that's what
than
I
I've done
mean. It's like
before.
it's just a
Yeah,
new it's like a newer.
yeah,
It's the same subject matter,
of
but how
course,
can
yeah.
you do it in again a slightly different way? But
That's
still,
it.
they still relate to each other to a degree.
Yeah, that's it. I may
Yeah,
well attempt to do more. It's difficult because you don't want to just replicate what you've already done. I almost have to try not do that image again, but I'm tempted to do something similar to it again. So I might have to maybe do it at sunrise or something, or just a different vibe to it somehow, but try and keep some of that the oversaturation of colors. But we'll see. We'll see.
would you do that? Would you do so let's say you took again, but as a whole separate tutorial. But let's say it was a sister version to this, where
Yeah,
you would almost draw out exactly the same scene again, but in like you say, like a very low sunrise almost, just peeking up so that the sun would like kiss the top of the mountains. Like, would you ever consider like doing that, like revisiting exactly the same landscape that you've curated here, but then
possibly,
showing it in a new way?
possibly. Although I would kind of just see it as such a different thing in its own way, because the color palette would be utterly different and everything
Oh
would
yeah,
appear utterly different. I mean, it would be a good exercise just to show that, but it at that point I'd almost just let the mountain become a different shape, and let things fall where they will a little bit more,
yeah,
rather than
fair
being
enough.
bound to it. But no, it's an interesting thought though. I mean, if I found a couple of images that I felt color reference wise, I could meld them together into one kind of composition, then yeah, it's a possibility. It is a possibility.
Awesome. So that's number one for yourself.
Yeah.
I have
What's yours?
selected
Come
my
on.
number one, and this is over on Patreon. This is my watercolor blue tip painting design. I just love this style. Last year,
You've done a
my
few,
number
yeah?
one tutorial of last year was exactly the same style of the watercolor style, but
Yeah.
it was a robin. And then this year, it's a blue tip. It's just taken it for me. I don't know. I said to you before we even started, like I don't do enough of the bird tutorials in this style,
Yeah.
and I don't because I don't. We like you said, we don't necessarily want to overdo it potentially, but did this one this year and just absolutely loved it. And I love the process of it. I love just blocking in those basic colors. I mean, the first part. Let's actually bring it all the way back to the beginning. There's always a reference photo which I share with the audience. We put it side by side in Procreate, like so we doubled the canvas width. We put it on one side, we do the grid system, we get it sketched in, because then I think that's far easier for people to follow along with,
Yeah.
the grid system, laying it out, really seeing how you've maybe developed your skills at learning how to draw from reference in terms of just sketching it out, because that's a skill set on its own. And then cropping the canvas to a degree, and then just layer in that color, get the dark tones in, get the basics in of where everything sits, and the brush just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And by the end, I take like artistic liberties in a sense of starting to scatter in like quite light white almost
Sure.
streaks within the feathers, but it just helps that randomness of having
Yeah.
that one little feather just poking out a tiny bit, and a little bit of white here and a little bit of white there just helps it so much just change and just look very random rather than paint
Yeah.
streaks all running in the same direction. And I look at it every time, and sometimes it's hard. I think people don't necessarily want to maybe hear you sort of talk up your own work maybe too much. I think, but for me, I look at this and I can't believe I drew it.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I get from this. Like I could look at that and say, like for example, on my screen right now, it is compressed quite down in terms of it's quite small in the window that it's in. But the fact it's crossed right down, I could see that being a photograph and someone's just watercolored around the outside with a beige
Yeah.
color, and then that's the end result.
Mhm.
In reality, it's everything inside there that we've done, and I think it's one of those designs that I can constantly look at and feel like I really did a
Really
good job
proud of
there,
it.
and I'm
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
proud of it. Yeah, I think it's hard. You don't want to, like I say, you don't want to sort of say, "Oh, I'm
Well,
so great," blah blah blah. But in this space, it's different, isn't it? It's like
yeah,
you should commend yourself on the things you do well and feel proud about that work, and the
definitely.
fact it's a tutorial for other people makes it even better, because I've seen other people do it to the same degree and I've gone,
Yes.
wow, that's amazing that they have equally, one, I feel
Yeah.
like I've done a great job with the design, but two, the teaching must be there as well for someone also to follow as well. So
I
this is going to
think
take my first place.
I think the photographic effect, the realism effect, is something that is always hugely satisfying to pull off, I think.
Yeah.
And this is beautiful, like you say, the textures, and it does, although you've got a compressed version of it, it does actually stand up to being zoomed in on, because
Mm.
it has a textural quality in the brushes, but you still don't really, it doesn't break down in the way that some of our tutorials do. I don't think. I think that it does
Mm.
stand up to scrutiny, but especially when you zoom out just a little bit and you're not super focused on the actual brush marks, it really does gel together and pull together. And the softer background helps. You don't need to get bogged down in the distractions of a detailed background. I mean, I guess you wouldn't do with that type of photography anyway, wouldn't you? It would always
No.
tend to be focal on the bird, and the background would be blurred out. But I guess you blurred it out even more just to really sharpen the attention on the bird. And it has that shallow depth of field aesthetic, which is just a really lovely aesthetic. But it's done really really well. It's a really lovely image. But I do think that it's fine to be proud of your work. I think it's part of the process. I think
Mm.
you go into you go into any gallery, and so an artist is showing their work off. You better damn believe that they're proud of their work. They're showing it
Yeah,
off.
it's true.
They've gone to a gallery, they've approached a gallery, or they did in their day if they're not no longer a living artist. There's not an awful lot of modesty in professional kind of art spaces. You've got to own your successes. I think there's a certain extent. I wouldn't want to be false modest about my work either. I think that's almost a sin in its own way too. And sometimes I've seen that people that are kind of like, well, it's not that great, and it's not this, and sometimes people are just wanting you to defend the piece for them, and then almost they can get more praise that way by saying, oh, it's not that great, and you go, actually, no, it's fantastic. And working
Yeah.
in the classroom, I've had that quite a lot with students, um, where people will feign that they don't like their work in order for you to bang on about how wonderful it is. But absolutely, you should. I mean, it's a sign of. I see it as a sign of modesty. It ironically, is that if everything you ever put up, you say, well, I can do way better than that, it's almost more arrogant. Whereas if you put
Yeah,
something
that's
up
true.
and say, this is a piece I'm really proud of, I think that it shows that it's normal for everyone to feel proud when they've done something well. I think it shows your humanness, and I'm always proud of my work. Um, I think over time that you start to then pick it apart and you think, well, like, this could be done better and that could be done better. But if you didn't have the wins and the feel of success and achievement over it, why would you bother doing it? I don't
Oh
think
yeah.
it's that win, isn't it? And you can't just be reliant upon other people's opinion. It's got to be your own. And this is kind of sums up this whole endeavor really in terms of picking our top ones. And if it was just a case of our top videos, we would just go for the ones that have the most views, wouldn't we, or the most comments or the most
Yeah.
compliments. And that's not what this is about. We've picked ones that we are the most proud of. And it's okay to be proud of your own work. I think it's an important part. It is also important to be self-critical and realize that you're not perfect and it could be better, but you've got to give yourself the morale and the motivation to think, yeah, I can do the next project. And you won't do that if you beat yourself up. You've got to say,
Yeah.
well done, pat yourself on the back. And that's what's going to give you propel you to strive for even better than you've done in the past, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it any better. That was a very nice way of putting it. So that is our top 3 tutorials of 2024. Even though we've released loads and loads more, it's very tricky to nail them down, I think, to 3, but we did a good job of actually crowning our winner this year. I think just reflecting on 2024 and coming to an end now, because of course this does come out on, as I mentioned, New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
It is the end of a year. I think it's always really nice to look back at them. I always refer to years in my mindset of like books and chapters. You
Yeah.
really do close a door on a chapter and you can start a whole new one in the next year. And I think it's always good though to make sure you do reflect on the year we've had. Yeah, I couldn't be more grateful. I hit my targets this year of what I wanted to achieve on
Yeah.
Patreon, for example, which was awesome. Carrying on past the point of releasing my 100th Patreon exclusive tutorial, which was a milestone I've just been seeing in the distance for so long. And I can think back to it. I don't know why. I can think back to a particular moment I was thinking about this objective, and it was in my old house now. And, since then moved and everything in between, but, setting that goal way ahead. And I can remember thinking, like, I need that number in the bank. And I'm looking forward to having that achievement and at least taking a little bit of an achievement from it. What sort of achievements can you look back on from this year and really sort of that stand out to you?
The obvious one for me is the subscriber count on YouTube. The kind of over the half a million,
course,
500,000.
yeah.
It's got to be that, really. I mean, for me, that's huge. And I look at it's always possible, no matter where you are in the order of things, to think, well, there's other people that have higher, there's other people that have fewer. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's been a long process, and we're doing this for 9-10 years. Excuse me. Give me a moment. I'm not crying. I've just got. You'll have to cut that out.
No, I'm not cutting that.
Yeah, I'm not getting choked up. I've literally got something in my throat. Yeah, so it's been nearly 10 years, and I could get emotional about it. That's not the reason I'm coughing. But it didn't just sneak up. It's not an overnight thing. It's taken a long time to get there, and it will probably take me another 5-6 years to double it and get to that million if I ever do. But yeah, so 500 was a big achievement. I think I kind of value it more now. It's in the rear view mirror. I think at the moment it's like, well, I haven't got time to stop and think about it or dwell on it or pat myself on the back too much. But it did mean a lot. It is an important thing, yeah.
Your course as well at the end of the year?
Yes.
The success of that.
I was working up. That's been doing really well. More of those to come. I have promised a tree one already, which people have signed up for anyway. So that one is in process, and then more of those to come.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one thing I'm very YouTube wise very happy just with how everything went this year in terms of the content, and just looking back at the catalog and being, like I say, proud of all the content you've made and putting it all out there. I think this is genuine. Like I feel like my biggest achievement this year is this show. Like what we've done with the show, because I think we started the show as a thought. Almost, it must be about 2 years ago as an idea of a conversation, something like that. And then saying to you early this year, like, I think we should do this. I think this is the medium we can do it in. I think this is where we can go with it. And you've been on board as well, because, I think from my point of view, you look at yourself and I'm like, does he want to do this with me? But then the fact that you had the confidence to do it with me as well, which was awesome. And we just
took me a little moment for it. To brace myself for the being on camera. I mean, you were a little bit more practiced in doing that, but for me, it was a big thing to show my face on camera. It's always ever been my voice and hands. So it was a big change. It's been good though. It
has been good.
It has,
100%, and that's where I was going to go with it. But I appreciate the fact that you backed the idea. You had the confidence in me to for us to you had confidence in me for you to at least get on board in the exact on board for the project together as a team, which is awesome. And then, like you say, like where it's gone, opening up the doors, like to have yourself, Flo, Miko, Kay, Pentip, CEO, Mark as well, like just already so many guests this year that we've had. Aurelia as well. I will be forgetting people, and I apologize, but and the guests I've got potentially lined up as well for next year. It's like the biggest vote of confidence in what we're doing, and I'm very grateful. And none of this is possible without you guys. So if you guys are not supporting the show, commenting on the show, enjoying it, the amount of love we get from people in the comments saying that this is what they look forward to every week which maybe says a little bit about our content recently and whether or not we're doing a good enough job on our YouTube channel. But no, but they enjoyed the conversation with us every single week, and I'm very, very grateful for every single one of you just supporting the show. And it's been awesome. We're only like 8 months into it, and I think it could go somewhere even bigger next year. And, you know, can't believe we're only 8 months into it. I feel like it's just become such the norm now. And also, I think it's really cool just to look back. And like you said on just a second ago, it's like at the beginning, like the way we started the recordings, potentially even how like you've grown as well on camera as well with the show. And it's just, you know, at first it's quite daunting. And now
I've been trying not to eat too many biscuits, but, you know, grown in confidence, not physically grown.
So yeah, I'm very grateful for that and for everybody and supporting the show. It's been awesome, and we'll make sure we keep making the content into 2024 25, and hopefully make it bigger and better as we
have
move
also
into next year.
passed it, because part of the channel things that is behind the scenes, isn't it? In order to move forward as the channel and it to become an even bigger thing is passing a certain number of hours watched, isn't it? Which we've passed that threshold now. So we will have adverts here and there on our videos, won't we? And I hope that people just understand that's part of the channel growing. It is obviously an important part of any channel that it is able to sustain itself, and there's expenses that come along with the channel itself, isn't there? The software that's used, the website, and things like that. So it will help keep the lights on, won't it, for the Sketchwave, now that we can have the odd advert here and there. So I hope people understand that the need for adverts, and people stick with us through them.
Well, I think YouTube puts adverts on the videos regardless if you're monetized or
not. Really? Oh, well,
it's
there
just,
you go.
It's just that the creator doesn't benefit from it at that point. So
how dare they?
At least it can help us now, and like you said, help the show as well grow into what we've maybe want to do next year. So that's gonna be our end of year wrap up, looking back at our top 3 tutorials of the year. We hope, and you let us know many times in the comments, but we hope you've enjoyed this year's worth of content. Of course, we'll have another episode for you next week as always, and then more guests to come in the future and loads more to talk about. So as always, if you've got a question for the show, you can leave it in the comments, or you can go ahead and fill out our little sort of sheet in the description down below. You can submit a question to the show, and I get all of the questions in there, so we can take a look at them, cover them on the show. So if you've got any burning desires you'd like us to answer, whether it be Procreate related or anything else, you can leave us a comment in the description. Otherwise, we will see you again next week for another episode of the Sketchwave.
Happy New Year. We should perhaps just add on the end.
And Happy New Year as well.
Happy New Year.